Hello, everybody. I'm Steve, and I'm here with Lady Jane Books and Marianne Halbert talk about cold comforts today. So, Jane, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Steve, for hosting us on this fantastic discussion. I'm Lady Jane Books, a fellow booktuber, and Steve and I did a buddy read of Cold Comforts by the incredible author, Marianne Halbert. And Marianne is joining us today. Thank you so much for making time in your schedule to talk about this. Steve and I are just so incredibly excited about this book. Would you like to say a little bit more about yourself, Marianne?
Sure. Thank you so much. Well, my name is Marianne Halbert. I am the author of Cold Comforts. It's a collection of what I call my quiet horror stories. And quiet horror is one of many subgenres in the horror writing industry. And it's my favorite kind to read and to write. So that tends to be where I go most of the time. And I just am thrilled that you guys selected Cool Comforts for your book read.
Yeah, it worked out really well. I was really excited that this all worked out the way it did. And I want to just take a quick second to thank our friend HB Diaz, who recommended the book to me after I read Nocturne. I just fell in love with Nocturne, and we were chatting, and she recommended this book, and I went out and bought it right away, and it just worked out perfectly. So it was really, really great the way it all worked out.
Yes, I'll second that. Thank you to her. I love Nocturne, and she's a great presence on Twitter, and definitely appreciate her shout out for Cold Comforts.
I actually also bought Nocturne on Steve's recommendation, which is how I was introduced to Cold Comforts as well. So I got to a wonderful thank you to HB.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's really great. So Marianne, so just in general, what were your inspirations for the stories in Cold Comforts? And we'll save the spoiler section for later, so then we'll give everyone a warning before we get into the spoilers for the stories.
Mm-hmm.
But just in general, what was your vision for this book, or just in general?
Yeah, the inspiration for the stories is really varied, just depending on the individual story. A lot of times you just see something, as I'm sure many authors do, you see one thing, and to you it just looks a little askew or somehow out of place or something, or there's just something about it. And so often I'll take an object. Several of the stories in this are objects that have a weird, either a haunting or a curse or something. And so there's a variety of inspirations for the individual stories, and we can talk about those when we get into the spoilery parts a little bit more. But then for the collection, I go to a writers' conference called NeCon every year, and I had met the folks who operate Crossroad Press, and I have over 30 short stories published, and I put the first in my first collection called Wake Up and Smell the Creepy. Several of those are quiet horror, a few are crime fiction, and a few are just like my weird, what I call my Twilight Zone stories. They're just strange. But I really wanted to go with an indie publisher for my second collection, so I started talking to the folks at Crossroad Press and showed them my stories and went from there. Yeah.
That's awesome. And thank goodness they did, because Cold Comforts was spectacular, in my opinion.
Thank you.
I second that. Yeah, very well done. And I think it's funny that you because as I was reading the book, I was wondering what would this be classified as, because they're so unique. And so when I went to the back of the book, I think it was mentioned it was literary horror.
Mm-hmm.
That's in a quiet horror. That's a good way to describe it, because that's kind of sneak up on you.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing, because there are so many types of horror. I mean, like HBD, as we mentioned, she writes mostly Gothic horror. I also I'm a huge fan of Gothic horror, and I've written a couple of stories in that vein. And then there's things like cosmic horror, which a couple of my stories do have some cosmic horror elements to them. But with the quiet horror, the main thing is you aren't going to see a ton of blood and violence and gore on the page. It's more implied. And so they're more character driven and really meant to be unsettling and build that sense of dread that you're just like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Yeah. I love that style.
That's something that I noticed, is that all throughout every story, there seems to be this real drive of emotion, and several different types of emotions, sometimes even in one story. And I personally really enjoyed that, because it was like we went on a little roller coaster, and then we all like plummeting into despair, which I love. So that was great for me. So yeah, I was really impressed. I had actually never heard of quiet horror before, or literary horror, yes, but not
Mhm.
particularly this type of subgenre. And so this was a whole new experience for me as a reader. And
Yeah. And I think Charles L. Grant was the first one who coined that term to describe his writing. So if you enjoy that, I would recommend looking up some of his stuff.
I will. I'm going to put him on my list.
Yeah. And thanks, Jay's BookTubing, for tuning in and joining us.
Hi, Jay.
So, what kind of inspirations did you have? Did you have, are there movies or other stories or other authors that inspired these stories, or just all the stories you've written?
I wouldn't say that there's any that directly inspired the stories, but certainly as far as my style, I have a lot of influences. My favorite author of all time is Shirley Jackson. I mean, I could read that first paragraph from The Haunting of Hill House over and over. I think it's perfect. And just the beauty of We Have Always Lived in a Castle, that's one I could read over and over again. Those characters are so compelling, and her writing style is just amazing. I also love Twilight Zone. So I think Rod Serling was a big influence on me because I watched those growing up. And so just that kind of, where again, something is just a little off, there's something weird. Sometimes it is horrific what's happening, but it's not like violent. It's just like something terrible happens. Ray Bradbury. And when I was growing up, I read a lot of like the old science fiction. There's that Science Fiction Hall of Fame, Volume 1. I literally, the covers that come off it, I read it so much. But some of the stories like the Cold Equations, or I also the story All Summer in a Day. Those ones where it's just so heartbreaking. Something happens that's just so heartbreaking. It's horrific, but it just breaks your heart. And that's what I like to do. So I like to break people's hearts. So I think that style is what I grew up falling in love with. And those stories I thought about even years later. Like The Foghorn, I remember reading that as a kid in probably a dentist's office magazine or something. And I didn't know what the title of the story was or who the author was. Later, as I thought about it, I was like, what was that story? And I remembered the story. And luckily, with the internet later, I was able to find it again and read it again and again. But yeah, it's those types of stories that have very strongly influenced me.
And our friend Kayla Lenzen is here. Hi, Kayla.
Hi, Kayla. Thank you for joining us.
I'm sorry, Jane, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I actually was going to also comment that I thought it was so interesting that you mentioned Shirley Jackson, because that popped into my mind a couple of times when I was reading it. I was like, that really sounds kind of the same like tone. So I was so happy that I was right.
So, I appreciate that. I appreciate that because I just think she's incredible. Her writing is just astounding.
I agree.
And we chatted a little bit before we went live on the stream, but how do you write an effective short story to get the reader engaged and get them invested in the characters in such a short amount of time? Are there any tricks that you use or any methods that you use when you're writing?
Yeah, I guess what I try to do, because you do have so little space to work with to get a complete story out. And different authors have different methods. Some write a whole bunch and then cut back. I write pretty skeletal in the beginning, just, almost just the plot of what's happening. And then I go back in and fill in the details to bring out those moods that I want or the atmosphere that I want. And so for me, I usually, try to start in the middle of the action. I don't want to do a big backstory or info dump that's going to kind of pull the reader out of it. So I just start at a point that I think will hopefully pull people into the story where there's something important happening.
That's interesting. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Jane. Go ahead.
No, go. You go, Steve. This is your channel. You can.
Oh no. Go ahead.
So I actually wanted to ask, how exactly did you get into writing, particularly this genre itself? We were actually also talking about that quiet horror is, a very like kind of niche type of subgenre. So I would really be interested, like, what was writing your first experience with writing, particularly in this genre? What was that like? Can you take us through that a little bit? What the early years were like?
Yeah. I originally started writing. I mean, some people, I talked to a lot of authors that were like, oh, I was writing when I was 4 years old, and I was a late bloomer, I guess. I've always loved the horror genre. I loved movies and books, and so I grew up just devouring all of this stuff. And later, I just remember getting kind of frustrated with certain movie plots where I thought the ending wasn't satisfying. Like it has a good setup, but you're disappointed in the ending. Like, oh no, it would have been so much better, character motivation if they had done this, or so much more, tugging at the heartstrings if they'd done this, or different things. So I thought, well, if I'm just rewriting these endings in my head, I might as well just start writing my own stories and end them the way I think they should be ended. I'm not the other people's stories, but my own. And so I just started doing that. And then my first short story that I wrote, we were on a family weekend down at a state park. I'm in Indiana, so we went to a state park, and I brought my laptop and I just started fiddling with this idea that I'd had in my head. And that story is the first story in Wake Up and Smell the Creepy, and it's called Invisible Fences. And because I'm a really good mom, but I am a terrible caregiver for plants or fish. I have discovered. I tried to have fish always died. I tried to have live plants, they always died. So I wrote this story about this woman, but obviously, because of the nature of my writing, it went off in a much darker direction. So I don't have live plants or fish tanks in my house anymore. But yeah, so it was just a little idea I had, and then it went from there. So that was my first story. I wrote it in one day while my daughter was napping a few feet away from me in our room there, and it got published. So
That's amazing. That's incredible. So you mentioned that like you're kind of more of a skeletal writer. So does that mean like you do more outlines, or do you do mostly like that first time the like info dump type of writing dump type of style?
Right. It's really, I wouldn't call it an outline. It's just like, let's say if I'm going to end up with a 5,000 word story, then I would write a first rough draft that may end up being like half of that. And then just to get the story, like what happens in what order, because then I can switch that around if it doesn't feel right. But I usually know the end of my story when I sit down to write it. I don't know how authors do it where they just start writing and don't know how it's going to end, because for me, everything is driving toward that ending. If you want it to have that punch and be satisfying, because that way you can add little hints along the way that if you read the story a second time, you'll pick up on things you didn't realize the significance of, but it all goes with the theme and driving to that point. So I like to write out that really, brief, rough draft and then go back in, because in my head, I know even at that point how I'm picturing the scene, what the mood is, what the ambiance is, but that doesn't come out at first. So then I have to go back in to fill that out so that the reader will hopefully get the same thing out of it that I'm putting into it. There's a question. Can I take that one, Steve?
Sure.
Do I consider myself a plotter or make it up as you go along? So yeah, in the writing world, we call that, are you a plotter or a pantser? I would say I plot it in my head. So by the time I sit down, I know where I'm going, because I might think about a story for months before I'll sit down to actually write it. And then once I sit down, I just write it. So I really don't have outlines for my short stories, although I'm working on a novel. And for that, I am a plotter. For that, because I need everything to fit the right way, I'm definitely doing a lot more outlining and plotting for that, because it's just a different nature of the beast when it's a novel.
I kind of like how you write with the end in mind, because one of the things that annoys the heck out of me as a reader is when they have this great setup and this wonderful like idea, and then the ending just kind of comes out of left field, and you're like, I feel like you missed some things. And I did notice that was totally avoided in Cold Comforts. Like that wasn't anywhere to be seen, which is part of the reason why I liked it so much, because I'm like, okay, she's doing the hints here. I see what you did there. So I think it really works well for your type of writing style.
Good. Thank you.
So did you guys want to go ahead and get into the stories? And so spoiler alert for anyone who has not read Cold Comforts, go read it and come back and watch later. Or if you don't mind being spoiled, you can keep watching. But still go read the book. It's a fantastic book.
Yeah, definitely read the book. It's really good.
So you do start off the book with a bang, because this first story, I think I sent Jane a message after I read it, and I was like, that was an amazing. I was in love
Oh,
after this first story.
Blown away myself. I came in and I was like, I can't wait to keep reading this. This was phenomenal. It was honestly one of the best short stories that I have ever read through any
wow.
genre, to be
Wow.
honest.
Well, thank you. That's quite a compliment because I know you do a lot of reading. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And that story is When Betsy Whispers. And I have to say, of all the stories, and like I said, I've got over 30 published short stories over the years. And that's the one that people seem, to say that about the most, like, wow, that was so different or unique, or that was one of my favorites. It's so weird. And so when I put it out there, I wonder what people think. It's the one that sticks with people most and strikes people in a way that just different, which I love. I mean, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, that's When Betsy Whispers, and I loved what you in the beginning. I was wondering what's going on here, and then it starts to kind of come together.
Unfold. I noticed that with like all the short stories that when you start in, you're like you're not really orientated quite yet because you don't know what's going on. And when I first started reading it, I was like, what are we doing here? But then and I think goes for like all of them, it just slowly unfolds and then comes into this really beautiful conclusion. And I think honestly, When Betsy Whispers does, I think it did it the best out of all of them. And I'm really glad that was the opening story because, I mean, it was breathtaking. It really was.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you.
I love how subtle all of these stories are. Like there's a degree of subtlety that you don't really know and you don't always like pick up on right away. And then, as you go along, you feel really intelligent that you like figured it out. So, and personally, I really liked how, was this story meant to be spicy, Marianne? This story was meant to be a little spicy, right?
Yes, this story is a little spicy.
I was like, I don't know if that's just Jane.
Totally weird because of the, yeah. It's a little spicy.
Okay, well, I really like the spice in this story. I'm just going to put it out there for all the internet to hear. I liked the spicy story of Betsy Whispers.
Good, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that.
I thought that was really, really clever.
Thank you. And I don't know if I would even call Betsy a protagonist or an antagonist, but she's not a typical protagonist or antagonist. So putting the spicy in there was a little challenging, but I'm glad you liked it.
I know. I was like, am I supposed to be feeling these type of things with this? I don't know, but I'm glad that it wasn't just me because sometimes it's just me.
Yeah. No, it was meant to be there. So I'm glad you picked up on that.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did like the spice, and it was enough to come up and bite you a little bit, and that's true with a lot of the stories. They're not. That's what I loved about all the stories is that you're not bashing us over the head with things. It's really subtle and kind of creeps up on you, and then sticks with you.
Yeah, and that's what I like where you said, Jane, that sometimes you didn't quite know what was going on, and I think that is part of what plays into, at least for me, a good horror story too, is just a little bit disorienting in the beginning so that people feel a little bit like what's going on, but then it starts to come together. So I'm glad actually that you felt that way when you were reading them.
But I think what's also really impressive is that, in some short stories, you could read Betsy Whispers and then you're like, oh, okay, well, the author's done this before, blah, 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 blah. But I actually had that same feeling throughout every single story. And I think that's really hard to maintain, especially when a reader kind of sees behind the curtain a little bit with the first one. So I was really impressed with how we're able to carry it through all the stories too and keep it interesting.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that.
We did have a question from Kayla. What is your favorite short story you've written?
I would have to say my favorite short story is Papa's Wrench and the Wind Chime, which is also in Cold Comforts.
That's our next one.
It's the next one. That's my favorite one. It's the one that I think about the characters the most still. Like, how are they doing? What are they up to? Kind of thing. I just really liked the way that one unfolded, and it's going to be on Pseudopod. So I don't know when, but Pseudopod did accept that. So that's a podcast where they read short stories. So you can listen to that at some point. So kind of like an audio, book type thing, but it's Pseudopod has different episodes that release every Friday. So at some point that one will be on there for folks to listen to. But yeah, that's my favorite, I would have to say.
Wow, it's a good segue.
Mm-hmm.
So the second story, Papa's Wrench and the Wind Chime. Do you have any questions about this, Jane?
So actually this was the only one that I feel like there was something happening, but I didn't fully like get it, unfortunately. And it still like sticks to me because I'm like, I know something happened, but I don't know what. And then when I went through and I read another story in the collection, I'm thinking something along the same lines happened. I think that one was Karen, the Karen one.
Oh yeah, hey Karen.
I'm thinking if maybe they were like slightly connected in that way. So when I read the Karen one, then I was like, okay, that's probably what she was hinting to in the previous one. But I would love to ask you, is that correct? Or is that not correct?
I mean, the stories aren't connected, I guess, in my mind, but in terms of, you mean just something's happening that, because it is one of those stories where a lot of times I don't spell everything out because I want to kind of leave it open to interpretation for the reader. I remember a friend of mine read that and he's like, what were they? Like, what are they?
That's what I was wondering. I was like,
yeah. And I'm like,
you're like, I don't know, I'm the author, I don't know.
Right. Because I guess I wanted to stick, in the narrator's POV. And so if we're staying with her, we only know what she knows. And she knows rumors, and she knows that there's this kind of mystery around this family, this creepy family. She knows that now she has a deeper connection to this family through what happens in the story. But a lot of things are still unanswered in her mind, but she knows what's important to her. And so I guess I kind of wanted to leave a little mystery there because I like that. But I hear what you're saying that, yeah, it's not all spelled out for sure. So it's
okay. Because I was like, what? Did I miss something? Or yeah.
No, I don't think you missed anything. I think it's one of those things where we're in her point of view, so we only know what she knows.
That was really cool.
Yeah, I'm relieved you said that because I went back and read it twice, and then after I was done with the book, I went back again and I thought maybe this is meant to be a little bit ambiguous, where we kind of fill in the blanks, and in some ways that's creepier than you spelling it out for us because you wondered. This story kept me thinking. It was one of the ones that really kept me wondering. Okay, what is going on?
Yeah, what is going on? Yeah,
because it's kind of Tim Burton-y to me a little bit, like with the character of the mother, which I really enjoyed. I was like, ooh, that's creepy.
Yeah, she's creepy.
It felt like
she's
kind of like
a creepy character.
Yeah. Needs a comb, like.
Yeah, definitely.
And especially the last line is "this seat's taken," and that and when I read that, I was like, oh.
What I missed? Yeah.
I actually at one point considered that was kind of the working title of it as I was drafting it, because I just liked the idea of that. But then I came up with the other one popped in my head. And I was like, oh no, that's a better title. But I still like that line because it circles back, so that it's all comes back.
The time was a little ambiguous and like what happened when. And I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a few different theories as I was reading it, and I wasn't sure which one was which. But
I'd love to hear your theories.
Well, first I wondered if there was something supernatural going on, or if they had some kind of illness that was contagious and
oh, that's a good idea. I didn't even think of that.
That's kind of what I was thinking is that people were staying away from them because they were sick or because
and like the mother won't hug the daughter anymore. I didn't even think of that, Steve. See, this is why we do buddy reads.
This is why I love this stuff, because it's fun to. What theories did you have, Jane, on that one?
I didn't have. I didn't have any. I was just like, what happened? But I did have a theory that maybe they were like otherworldly a little bit. Maybe I don't want to say aliens, or just maybe something not exactly human, not demonic, but something else.
Yes. And that's what I know.
Yeah, and so I was like, okay, well maybe like that's like a power that they have, or maybe that's like an effect, or maybe everybody knows that's what happens when you get too close to them, that you live in a loop or something.
Right.
So yeah, but I couldn't quite grasp a full theory, but I was like, okay, maybe
No,
there's
that's
elements.
in my mind. That's what they are. Like they are not fully human, but because they breed with humans, some of the offspring are more human-like, and some take more after their mother and end up in the woods. So there's those that would stay in society, and some that go to the woods. And
Yeah,
so,
because that also
yeah,
messed me up too. I'm like, wait, is that like a rite of passage, or is that
yeah, I
supposed to
think
happen?
that's where
Not supposed to happen?
they're more monster-like. The ones that, because they inherit different traits. In my mind, like the ones that are more strongly, non-human, end
Whatever.
up
Yeah.
in the woods.
Yeah. And then I wondered, are they some like a vampire, or when they're
Yeah.
young and when they get older they have to kind of
They like hit
die?
puberty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think,
Oh,
yeah, I wouldn't even say vampire, but I think it's something in my mind along those lines. Nothing that I can even define or name. It's just they're kind of their own thing. I should probably come up with a name for whatever they are at some point. But that's why I had their last name just be Monstrum, because they're just kind of monstrous. And, this kind of just weird thing that we haven't seen before. But yeah, when they hit puberty, because they age very quickly. And then, yeah, when they either turn more monstrous or turn more human, and can pass as human. But with, in the end, she doesn't care which direction it's going to go. She's going to be there for someone who, she feels very connected to. So.
I also wondered, because there's a great subtlety about Papa's wrench in that, and there was like these rumors about who, the children's fathers were. I was also wondering if there was like something there was like, wait a minute, is there a subtlety there that we're missing, or like, I don't know.
Well,
I knew there was something there, but I couldn't grasp it, I guess.
Yeah, because, her dad went to fix the tire.
Yeah.
And then that little girl who got on the bus at the end had his red hair. So
yeah, that's why I was like, I think I get this, but I was like,
mm-hmm.
And
because
I
he
also
did
wondered,
spend the night there fixing that tire. So.
yeah, so I was wondering if like maybe it was almost like a mating ritual type of thing, because obviously the mother had her wiles or however she made children, and then obviously we have this young protagonist girl. I'm presuming it was a girl, right?
Yes.
And that she's being attracted to one of the creatures persons as well. So I'm almost wondering if that was like a way that they continued on like the species or something like that. So I that's also where I was going. I was like, maybe this is like attract a mate or something, and she's like the next mate. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely with the mom. And with the girl, I guess I felt like her relationship with him was almost more, not so much like a sexual attraction, but more like a curiosity and some kind of strange bonding.
Yeah, like that's what I put into it too. But I also wondered if that was like a spell that the mother had put on all the men in the town, and I don't know. So I was just kind of intrigued by that.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think any man in town who comes around that mom is gonna end up fathering one of her kids. Yeah, I think that's why
kind of weird considering
close to that house.
That's okay. Okay, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, almost like she's a siren or something, but in a
exactly. But then she has like
witchy way.
Hair, so I was like, that's cool.
Yeah.
That was really fun. That was clever.
Good.
And the next story was like riding a bicycle.
Workplace horror.
Yeah, it was a fun shift of gears from the first two to this one. It was a nice shift, and it kind of brings it to more modern, realistic feel.
Yeah.
Because I think we can all relate to being the new employee and kind of trying to fit in, and so it was interesting to read that.
Yeah, and I really liked like the supernatural element of this one, because like that girl was there. I was like, there's something wrong with this girl. Like she doesn't work here anymore or something. And then when I read it, I was like, yeah, that was good. That was a good story. That was a good one.
Yeah, because I think anyone who's been in a job like that, where just soul crushing job, where you just feel horrible every day you're there, like this poor guy, couldn't relate to that, and how it was just this phenomenon that was happening and really haunting the employees. Yeah.
Yeah, that was very clever.
Yeah, and I think it was really well in all the stories, but this one too is how it kind of sneaks up on you. You learn, and you have all these theories in your mind as you're reading, and then it starts to, like you said, it all starts to come together.
Yeah.
Was there any specific inspirations for that one that you took when you were writing it, or any ideas you had?
That one there was a call for submissions for workplace horror, and I thought, to me, I've had jobs that I've been really happy at. I've had some bosses that I didn't like, other bosses I thought were great, and so I just kind of tapped into my own experiences with frustrations and things, at different points in my life, and thought, well, I can pull on some of that to put into this story. Yeah.
Did you have any other thoughts on that one, Jane?
No, that one, it was I liked it, the supernatural element, and I kind of liked the twist with the girl. That was my biggest takeaway of it.
Good.
So the next one is Luxor Decanted.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I love how everything just sneaks up on you and everything comes together. And at the end, you're like, oh, okay. But
I personally,
I'm sorry, Jane, go ahead.
thirsty. I personally really like the juxtaposition of this beautiful countryside. I believe it was set in Italy. Am I correct? Yeah. Yeah, Italy.
It was France, but very near
yes,
Italy.
that's right. Okay, yeah. I couldn't remember if it was Italy, Greece, or France. So I apologize.
Yeah.
I read one. I read one for every single day for 13 days, so my details are a little rusty.
Mm-hmm.
But I really liked the juxtaposition of this gorgeous vacation and this like luxury and this, like beautiful architecture, and just I felt like I was there. And then I also felt that like slight creep where I'm like, you shouldn't talk to that guy. You shouldn't be talking to him. Don't talk to him.
Yeah.
Just sit back and enjoy.
You shouldn't go up that hill.
Yeah. And I was like, literally, this hill is doing everything to tell you not to go up there, and yet somehow you literally walk up there. Not even a car, not a train, not a bus. Literally, you are walking up to something. So I was like,
Yeah.
I also really like how creepy I believe you would call him like an antagonist, maybe. The host. I loved how he's like, oh, you have to thank, so and so, and I'm like, that right there sounds like something I'd turn around and be like, nope.
That's right.
Yeah. So I just really liked how like unsettling it was.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I love the conclusion on that one too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
And it got kind of, and then I think there was a monkey or the baboon that jumped on the car, and then it was what's, and then at the very end you learn in the last paragraph. I think it was the last paragraph.
I didn't make a note on that one.
Yeah. Or else, maybe even not the last page or two.
I read it on Kindle, so I don't.
Yeah, I didn't have it on both. I was switching back and forth. As I went to work, I was reading on Kindle, and then I was grabbing my book. So the next one was Housing of the Hollygobs.
I love this one.
Yeah, that's my little play on hobgoblins. So I call them the Hollygobs. But
this one. Go ahead, Steve.
I'm sorry, Jean. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Steve. I talked over you last time. Go ahead.
I was wondering about this one, as if there was any stories that you heard as a child or as you were growing up that inspired this.
Actually, what inspired that was when my girls were little. They're in college now, but they were in Girl Scouts and like brownies and Girl Scouts, and I was not the troop leader, but one of the moms that would go on the camping trips and just help out and stuff. And their troop leader would always tell us these stories. We'd be going on trails in the woods, and she would have us stop and build these little houses because she said that if you didn't, then the little forest people would come in the night and steal your shoes because they needed a place to sleep. And I thought that was such a cute thing. And so we'd make these little houses out of all this stuff you can find on a trail. But then I thought, well, what if you didn't have shoes? What would they take instead? If you chose not to build a house for them and they couldn't take your shoes. What would they take? And so that's how I got the idea for that one.
I love how basically you just said that, oh, it's a sweet story about like these little, forest people, and then you turn around and make it one of the most sinister things I've ever read. I love it.
Yeah.
I love that. So yeah, that was fun. This one really kind of gave me Bridge to Terabithia vibes. If either of you have ever read that.
I have.
Yeah, it kind of gave me that similar, like, that summary and like a sad time, but something else is happening. It was like kind of this wonderful, like almost supernatural, like Bridge to Terabithia. And
Yeah.
I was really excited to read that because that's one of my favorite books. So
Oh, good. Yeah.
I like that one very much.
Yeah. And I do like, and I'm sure, because you've both read the whole book, I do like stories about kids. And so I mean, probably, I don't know if half the stories, but a lot of my stories involve children because that's just such a time when, imagination and just the way they, feel about things. So I've always loved stories about kids. And this is one of my stories that the main characters are children.
Yeah. I also think that's interesting because they seem to like accept things that adults would be like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? And,
Right.
for them, they have like this lack of fear. So even though it may be unsettling to us, they don't have that sense yet sometimes.
Yeah.
So I really like that too, because there's this sense of like fearlessness about it. And there's also this really interesting dynamic of kids sometimes not being believed. So like if they went to a parent or someone and said, the helicopters are going to get me, the parents are going to be like, no more candy.
Right.
But
exactly.
for them, it's really intense because it is happening. So I really like how you utilize that to an advantage when writing horror.
Great. Thank you.
It's a really good observation.
Thank you.
The next one was The Fourth Movement. This is another one that and I like that it's even the horror aspects or the visuals are just really subtle that I had in my mind. And when they look over the cliff and they see the movement, and it's not it leaves a lot to the imagination that makes it creepier than if you spelled it out for us.
Yeah. And that one of my daughters was in marching band for several years in high school. So she was like, Mom, you should write a marching band horror story, because we lived and breathed that world for a while. So she was my technical assistant to fact check me and make sure I was describing, using the right terms for that. But yeah.
I just wrote "The show must go on" in my notes, and that's it. That was ultimately the whole thing, and I thought that was really clever and a clever way to do that. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Thanks. Yeah.
I also like the.
Oh, go ahead.
I also really like this idea of the whole town kind of knows something bad's happening, but everybody's just gonna like ignore it and hope it goes away. So that was like a lot of fun because I'm like, y'all not leaving town? Like, there's a giant pit of, not to be too spoiler, but there's a giant pit of dead children in marching band outfits, and y'all just looking down at them off the cliff? Like, come on.
Right.
Like, I'd be selling my house on Redfin. Like, no.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty cool, and that was really clever the way that, that was amazing.
Well, thank you.
And it was oddly touching at the end when they had a chance to finish what they've worked on, and it was, I don't want to say a feel-good story, but you wish that we all had a chance to do that, to finish unfinished business, to have a chance to finish what unfinished business or
right. And that really is, and I'm glad you said that, because that really was the point of that, because these kids, they work so hard, and all the kids in marching band and all kinds of performing arts and sports and everything work really hard. But then if you would get to that point and not be able to, get those endorphins and that reward of the audience enjoying that and feeling what you're creating and something special. So that's really what where it is almost feel good in the horror world, that they were able to perform and get that payoff. So
I also think that's like the perfect story for 2020.
Yeah. Yeah.
because I feel like a lot of people just live that literally, that they work so hard, and especially for
Right.
like high school kids, and a lot of them didn't have prom or formals or anything like
Yeah.
that. So I thought,
Yeah.
I was like, huh. And I know this was written before, hey, obviously 2020.
Yeah.
Like, wow, that's really relevant to today.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. To anybody who's worked for something like that, and you want that payoff of like, let me show you what I did. Let me, make you feel something good. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I didn't think of that, Jane. That's really good. Yeah, I didn't think of that. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like that one because of that.
So the next one was Neath the Follow Ground, which this one really
Yeah.
got under my skin.
Yeah. I was wrecked. I took the day off after reading after this one.
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
I couldn't read anymore. I'm like, nope, I'm done.
Well, and I don't know if you guys are experiencing the cicadas currently. We are here in Indiana. So it was funny because I got the idea for that one when they were here 17 years ago, and now they're back.
Oh,
because
careful,
it's that
Marianne.
the cicadas. So yeah,
That was
but
really
yeah,
good.
I'd love to hear what your thoughts on it and your experience with it.
So, do you want to go first, Steve? I've been talking a lot.
No,
go first.
no, go ahead.
So I absolutely adored this one. This one, along with Betsy Whispers, was my favorite of the entire series. I loved how there's an exploration of grief to it, and about how sometimes when we're in grief, we can't always think clearly and we can't think critically because it kind of overshadows everything.
Right.
I saw that within the character, and I was just so blown away by the twist that I was like, I was heartbroken. I really was. And I couldn't read anymore. I did take the rest of the day off, and I was like, I'll try again tomorrow. And I really just, I loved the story. I really loved every part of it.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad.
Yeah, I'm with you, Janet. I'm with you. This is one of my. I hate to rate them, but it's probably one of my favorites of the book, just because by the end, you're like you said, you're heartbroken, and this is awful thing happening, and again in the beginning, it starts off really subtle, and something's not quite right here, and then it kind of builds, and by the end, you're just crushed. So
yeah.
And I think there's a lot of heavy themes in this one. Obviously about ending a person's life of suffering, and that's something that I don't see a lot in horror, even though I think it is one of the more interesting parts of life. You won't see it a lot even in just literary fiction, you know what I mean? So I thought that being able to go there and not discuss it, but include it in a story was really brave, because I do think it's very controversial. But in this story, you saw how it fit, and it really played into why the character was doing what he was doing. I thought that was incredibly brave as a writer to put into a story.
Well, thank you.
And that was also, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. How hard is it to tackle subjects like that without crossing a line or without going too far into it? How is that as a writer to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, and there's always, you see a lot of different discussions and different people's opinions about controversial topics, but I do deal with death a lot in my work, just because that's something we've all experienced, a loss, and grieving someone, and those feelings are horrific. I mean, you can feel so lost and just, you want to make that stop, but you can't figure out how. And so I guess for me, it's just kind of that natural, including some of my own experiences in the story to make it feel authentic, because I think anyone can relate to that, because everyone has experienced, even though each person's individual experience is unique to them based on who they are and their relationship with the person they've lost, we're all walking a similar path in that sense. And so I just try to be, sensitive to that, and trying to make it not be for any kind of reason other than that's what this character is going through, and it's something we can all relate to.
Well done, very well done.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Really cool. And I really liked the desperation of the other characters that I feel like had made this plan, and there was so much work and thought put into it, and then just to have it totally decimated by someone who had such great intentions but didn't
Mhm.
understand the implications of it. I thought that would. I'm thinking of like their perspective. I was just like horrified because I was like,
Right.
I was
Right.
done.
Because the sacrifices they had made to set that up, and like you said, then to have it
Just
taken out of their hands,
like a
and
house of cards.
mhm, mhm.
It was very good, very emotional.
Oh, well, good. I'm glad, and I really do. I mean, I feel like to me the best stories that I like to read or to watch are the ones that really move you emotionally, and so I think empathy is a huge part of horror. I think that's what really makes those stories so striking. When you read something or when you watch a movie that just makes you feel so deeply, then you're like, wow, that was a home run. That was something that I'm going to remember for a long time. So if I can provide that to other folks, that makes me happy.
Well, you provided it to me.
Oh, good. Okay.
Cried like a baby. Cried like a brat in a candy store.
Oh, good.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the one following was Adverse Possession.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so impressed with how your stories start and how everything unravels. This is another one that I thought was really well done. I really love this story too. This is one of my I love them all, but this one in particular stuck out to me just because it's just so creepy, and again it's horror, but it's like we said, it's quiet horror. It's not in your face. It's really just haunting.
Yeah. And that one was a little challenging for me because I certainly don't think you have to have likable protagonists, and sometimes the more flawed a character is, the more interesting they are. But in this one, he's particularly, I think, unlikable, but he's still just this guy who, he thought he was getting this deal. He was going to have this house, he just kind of wanted to be by himself, left alone. And then he found out he's really not alone. So, yeah.
I also really liked how we changed up the setting in this way. I think when I first heard of Cold Compass, I literally thought it was going to be like wintry stories.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry, wintry stories, and then I was so surprised that a lot of them were actually very summery,
Mhm.
and they were very in hot weather, and like the cicadas and all that. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. But then when we turn to this, where it's like in this cold,
Mhm.
desolate, icy place, I
Yeah.
was like, wow, I'm really impressed on how versatile these stories are. And this story showed me that yes, you can do versatile characters, you can do versatile themes, you can do emotional, you can do just pure horror, but you can also
Mhm.
really be versatile in setting. And
Mhm.
that's what kept me reading. And I think that this story particularly portrays that, why I kept reading.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about unlikable characters, and I think in a story like this, because they're so unlikable, you obviously you root against them, but you understand the dumb things they do. So
Right.
as you're crafting the story, does that make things easier or harder to work around the character?
Yeah, I guess it probably depends on the story. For this one, I just kind of pictured, I knew I was going to have a character buy this property that had some conditions that were not going to be met. And then I had to think of why wouldn't they meet him? And I'm like, well, that's just who he is. He's just like, nah, I don't need to do that. It's my property now. I can do whatever, that kind of a thing. So his character really was created and driven by the plot that I knew I wanted to have. So he's just the kind of guy who was going to be kind of cavalier about not following the rules, and it came back to bite him literally. So yeah.
Yeah, this one gave me a big Lovecraftian feeling towards the end, which I kind of liked, like the creature feature type of story, which I wasn't expecting. I was like,
moving
wait
mound.
a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, but wait, there's a graveyard, there's a creepy house, what's going on? And then suddenly, boom. I'm like,
yeah.
okay.
So the one following that was the Fire Tower.
This one was trippy. I'm gonna be honest.
It's very trippy. It's one of the weirdest ones. Yeah, that one was just kind of stream of consciousness writing. I just kind of let it keep going, and that is one of the stories where I because it's a little different style, and there is a fire tower at that same state park I was telling you about where I wrote my other story, and I've climbed that fire tower many times, from when I was a little girl with my grandparents to now with my own kids, and so I really wanted to just include that in a story, but I wasn't sure where I wanted it to go. So literally, like as I kept going higher, I'm like, things are getting weirder, and it just got pretty weird. Yeah.
Weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know what to make out of this one. This was the only one where I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's strange, but some people say it's one of their favorites. I think because it's so weird, and some people are really into weird horror or cosmic horror. And so if that's your jam, then this story is probably a good fit for you. But it's definitely different than most of my writing.
I'm never gonna look at a sea urchin the same way again. Never.
Right?
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. Don't need that.
Yeah, I think in reading this one, you can have a map of what you're kind of expecting. This one just went off the map. Like you kind of just have to go with it, and that's kind of because I had to go back and reread it and just kind of lose all your expectations and just
right.
Yeah.
Just accept it for as it comes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did that too, and then I
yeah.
It's not always easy to do because we're so used to having expectations, and to lose those, it's different.
I also think with this short story collection, because you set it up with such subtlety and clues in a lot of your other stories, I think that's what like threw me for a loop, because I'm looking for like, okay, well, what's going to happen? Blah, blah, blah. And I didn't necessarily see any of that, so I was like,
yeah, this one's just different and weird. Yeah, so fans of weird horror might love it. I see Kayla saying that.
Yeah, Kayla would love this. I'd love to hear what
check it out. It's weird if you like weird. Yeah.
And Jen, I know we're coming up on 50 minutes, so if you get to the point where you have to bow out, just let us know.
Okay.
I think we have 3 stories left.
Okay.
So the next one was Conjuring the Corpse Candles.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another one that I wondered if there was a story from your childhood or that you've heard that inspired this one. Yeah,
we have a living history museum really close to us, like 20 minutes away from us. I love it. And also in other parts of Indiana. And I love going out to like, if you ever go down to like Charleston or Savannah, and there's recreation, so you can kind of put yourself step back in time. This is what it would have been like in the 1800s. And they have this hoop and stick game there that the kids can play. And so one time my husband and I were talking about making different things, like how do you make things seem scary? And he's like, I said, what do you think is like the most innocent object or thing, that would not be scary? And he said, probably that hoop and stick thing. He's like, I don't think you could make that scary. And I'm like, challenge accepted. So I wrote about a haunted hoop.
Yeah, I couldn't remember which one this one was just for the title, but I remember I loved this one. This one was, I think, my 3rd favorite of the entire series.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, exactly. I loved the lore behind it and like the background story, because that was another one that was so heart-wrenching that I was like, so
yeah,
it was very deep in that way. It wasn't it wasn't shallow or anything like that. It wasn't like cheap. In other words, I use the word cheap. I don't like things. It was not cheap. It was very, very luxurious in that way. So I love that you put the effort into the background, and you made the background story really gut wrenching, because I was bothered by this one. I really was. And then to think that like the ancestors are like still there, and I'm wondering like, well, why are they like helping this kid? I'm a little like, I don't know, I'm a little suspicious of people. I'm just gonna put it out there. I'm a little suspicious about the old woman. I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah.
So that was one that I was like really engaged in.
Yeah, well, because if I was going to have something that was so innocent, it's like a child's toy, basically, from the 1800s, be scary, I really needed that backstory to be, strong. There had to be some pretty powerful rage and something awful, that happened to lead to that. So I did have to put a lot of thought into the backstory to justify why that hoop was out for revenge. So, but yeah.
I love the line that it said he got what he wished for. Oh, like murdered dead.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, because that's what he wanted, but he didn't know what it would cost. Yeah.
that one was very similar to a work by Stephen King that I had read. I don't know when the publishing was, but one of my all-time favorite short story collections was Full Dark, No Stars by Stephen King. And there's one that's kind of similar, a different premise, and not as emotional as yours is.
Yeah.
But you know, there was this one where he was like, oh, he wished for something, and then he's kind of like cursed and kind of like broken about it. And I hadn't thought about that story for years, like since I read it. And when I read yours, I was like, oh my gosh, I remember that. That was so
good.
But I actually personally think I like your rendition a little bit better, like because it does have that gut wrenching sadness to it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah.
I kind of took some like the small town creepy vibes out of it, because in these small towns there's these weird unspoken things going on that are right under the surface that no one really talks about, or the older people may, but so that kind of got under my skin with that too.
Yeah, I love a small town horror, so you had me with that one.
So the following one was one that we had talked a little bit about earlier, was Hey Karen.
Karen. I'm just gonna put it out there. I love teacups, so I'm a little afraid now. Like you can ask Steve, my earlier like videos, I'm literally drinking tea in these cute little like shiny teacups. And then I went for the mug instead today. I didn't do my teacup. I'm a little afraid of it. So, yeah, this one was pretty clever.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I did think of you, Jane, when I read that one with the teacups.
Yeah. So for this one, actually, this is the one where I kind of saw a connection to, forgive me,
Papa's Wrench.
Papa's Wrench.
Yeah, and the one.
Yeah, so then I was kind of like, wait a minute, like, is that same thing like happening here, or how is this like happening? Is it like a demon? Is it a ghost? What's going on here? But despite those questions, I still really enjoyed it because it's that subtlety that you slide into something and you don't realize what's happening until you're like deep into it, and you're like, wait, how did that happen? And I think that really mirrored what the character was experiencing, and I mean like really mirrored it. Exactly. And I thought that was pretty clever, and that's not an easy thing to do, as a writer, and I thought that was really successfully done, to be honest.
Good. Oh, good.
What do you think, Steve?
I wondered if she was losing her mind, is what I was wondering, if she was just losing it, and it was all her magic, and something triggered this collapse in her mind with the teacups and this maybe stress over the gift and everything. But yeah, that's what I was wondering, that if she was just going crazy.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those stories that you could interpret either way, kind of like the yellow wallpaper. It's one of those where it's like, is something really happening, or is she just losing her mind and she doesn't know it? So yeah, read the yellow wallpaper if you like that kind of, let the reader decide. It's a great short story. But yeah, I think you could interpret it either way. To me, it's like if you go to an estate sale or a garage sale and you get something that you think looks awesome and that you would like it, but it's like, there's some history or some connection where part of the person's soul, may be connected to that still. So I think it could be that the woman who previously owned those teacups just wants to come back and is using this lady as a vehicle to do that. But I think you could also interpret it that she's just maybe having some kind of break with reality. So yeah, it's one of those that I think could be open to interpretation.
I think I like that even better, Steve, because I forgot that there's like almost a calmness afterwards, and she like settles into it.
Yeah.
So that could very well be true. I didn't think about it that way.
Yeah, that's why it's so fun to talk about these after all these different. It's especially something like this. This is just, I'm so glad this worked out the way it did, because it was a perfect book to read and to chat about.
Good.
The story following that one was a used infinity.
Mm-hmm. The haunted GPS system. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I always like hate the way that the GPSs sound. It's just something like kind of grating for me. So when he
Mhm.
was like, "Oh, this sounds sexy," I'm like, "Does it sound?" But then
Right.
as it like unfolds, you're like, "Oh, okay." I thought he was lonely, to be honest. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and he was like,
Which he
falling in love.
was.
Yeah,
But
he was. But I was just like, the GPS, really? We couldn't go on the internet or something. Anyway, so yeah, so I really, really liked this one because it also kind of gave like a murder mystery story to it, which is
yeah.
something we hadn't seen before in this collection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm one for murder mysteries. I'm just gonna put it out there. I love, like whodunits and where'd
Yeah.
the girl go, and I love all of that. And so I thought this was really clever, the way that you kind of merged that into
A
the
little
collection.
cross genre action there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it kind of gave me Rear Window vibes, if anyone's seen that film with Johnny
Oh
Depp.
yeah.
That's the type of like cinematography feeling that I was getting with this story,
Hmm.
going to visit the boyfriend, and then, this car and this like kind of elusive other character. And that's how I felt. I felt like I was watching kind of like Rear Window, but with a different storyline.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I didn't even think of that about kind of a crime, like a crime, like a murder mystery. I didn't think of that until you had both mentioned it, but that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it also
No, I
had
didn't
those
think of that.
supernatural elements. I mean, they did have like,
Right.
the
Mm-hmm.
mystery.
Yeah.
I also felt really bad for him when he was like, he solved the mystery, okay? Like she's obviously moved on, and he like expected her to stay in the GPS. I'm like, nah, honey, I'm moving on. Like, no, 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 no.
Right.
I'm not your chauffeur. We're not doing this. So
Exactly.
I was a little bit like impressed. I was like, you really thought she was gonna stick around for him? And that's, I think, where the loneliness came out of. And then
Mm-hmm.
I almost felt a little bit bad for him because I was like, he needs a
Mm-hmm.
friend.
Yeah. Yeah. He definitely needs a friend. Yeah.
He needs a friend if he's talking to his GPS.
Well, he needs a friend.
It's true.
Yeah, that's true. Poor guy. Yeah, you did feel that desperation from him though, that he
Yeah.
so desperately wanted her to stick around,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and
And it's kind of
that's
cool.
haunting too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool that it almost mirrored like the boyfriend too, because he wanted her to stay around, and
Mm-hmm.
now, the guy wanted her to stay around. So it's kind of like she was like this mystical person, even
Mm-hmm.
if just a victim. So I
Right.
thought that was really neat. I thought that was cool.
Good.
Yeah. I kind of got the feeling that at the end she went off on her own. She was doing what she wanted to do, and wasn't. I don't know if it was that these men thought they had ownership of her in some way, that they
Yeah.
so that's she was kind of free to do what she wanted to do.
Yeah. And to me, I felt like once, the truth had come out and her body had been discovered, that she then was like, at peace and no longer needed to be trapped by what had happened to her. And she now had agency to do what she wanted to do, which was, you know, no longer be stuck there in that car.
Yeah.
I also felt like we got this image of her being a very free spirit, like
Mhm.
in life. So then
Right.
that really makes sense now because she got to do what she wanted to do. So yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Mhm.
And the last story was A Bone to Pick, and this one the last page or so really got under my skin. Well,
Really?
obviously got under my skin, but
Wow.
yeah,
Well, tell me about that. Tell me.
just because he was, uh, you know, yeah,
It literally got under your skin. No. Yeah.
the flap of
Mhm.
flesh, as the moon rose high, peeled back a flap of flesh and pressed her finger to the bone. That was
Mhm.
just
That's a
Mhm.
deep cut.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, she's not your typical protagonist either, but I love Moline. I love her. She's one of my favorite characters. She's so different, but yeah, got to root for her.
I loved how like macabre this was. Like you go around like picking bones for people. I
Mhm.
loved it. Like I
Mhm.
Old school. And I love the description of like how horrific it was, like with that bird. And you didn't shy away from that, like with the maggots, the organs, everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was really cool because it was quintessential, like almost a quintessential horror story to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I liked it very much, I have to say.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was a little disappointed though, because then on that note, I wanted to know if the bully had done it, which I think probably he did. But I was like, oh, come on, you can't like leave us in this story, in this great, fantastic short story collection, and then that's our ending. Like we cut off like at the end of the tape. No, come on, I want to
Right.
know what happened. So I was hoping for a little bit more out of that one, but I understand why you did
Mm-hmm.
that, but I personally was very disappointed that there wasn't more of it.
Right, right. Well, and I thought about it, but I guess to me, I wanted the focus to be on really showing us who she is, not so much what he did. And that's what she's willing to do to get to the truth and
Okay.
to defend herself and her brother's memory. So to me, it spoke more to who she is, and I felt like that was a strong moment to leave it on that, because ultimately, sure, we're all curious, did he do it or not? But ultimately, it's really her story. So I wanted to. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But
I
we
can
are going to see
understand
more
that.
of her. I'm going to write another. She's going to be appearing in another work of mine.
Yes.
Oh,
So exciting. Thank you very much. Cool. I
more to
also
come.
thought I also thought the segment with the brother was very touching,
Mhm.
especially like the morgue scene where, you think it's one thing and then they put them in the back and she opens up and she realizes that it's not just her brother. That
Mhm.
I don't know why, but that just gutted me. And I
Yeah.
don't know if it's because, it's implying that there's more deaths or there weren't more deaths, or I don't know what it was about that scene, but it really
Mhm.
bothered me for some reason, but
Yeah.
in a good way.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I've never read anything like that. I thought it was very sad. I also thought that I was really intrigued when she kept on saying, "Oh, he's not dead," and then she comes to realization that he is dead.
Mhm.
So that was kind of interesting. I don't know if that was like the childlike quality in her at that time or how
Mhm.
that worked. Can you talk a little bit about like how that developed or what the reason
Yeah,
was?
I guess, because her parents had been told he was dead, the family thought he was dead, but because of her ability with the bones, she knew he was injured, but that he was still alive. And so she wasn't accepting it because she knew it wasn't true. But of course, like we talked about earlier with kids and things supernatural that they can, connect with or tap into, the parents wouldn't have believed her.
Yeah, there we
And
go.
then once she realized again through that ability that he had actually passed on from his injuries, she accepted it. And when she went to her mother and her mother's like, what's wrong? She's like, he's dead. And so then the mom thought she was just coming to accept it finally. But really, to Moline, he had just died because he had just died. So,
Okay, so
um,
it is like the time frame then. Okay.
mhm.
'Cause that's what like confused me with the bird. Like we're looking into the past because obviously the bird was dead.
Right.
But then with the brother, we were actually looking at the present moment where he was, right? Then,
Yeah.
oh,
Hmm.
okay. That's what threw me because I'm like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
now I get
So
it.
that's why it hit her, differently because she could see where he actually, what state he was
I
actually
see.
in.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what threw me because we were looking at the
Okay.
past with
Yeah.
the bird, and then we were actually looking, it was a connection between them at the present time.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now I get it. Now I
Yeah.
appreciate it a little more.
Okay.
I'm
It's
so
so
glad that I
funny
could
that
talk to you about this stuff because if this was
Yeah.
just me doing,
This
I
is
would
fun.
be so angry.
Yeah.
it's so funny when we talked to a horror writer and we said that really got under my skin and that really made me sad for the rest of the day and you're like, oh, I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad. Really
Yeah.
needed.
Mission accomplished. Yeah.
It's so interesting. It's so fun. So Marianne, thanks again. I really appreciate you coming by to chat with us and to talk
Yeah.
about your book. It was worked out really great. I really love the book. Really glad we had a chance to chat. What are you working on now? What's coming in the future for you?
Yeah, I've been writing some short stories recently and sending those out to different markets. So we'll see what happens there. And I'm working on a novel called The Lady's Pocket, which is a ghost story, has a big haunted house, actually kind of a haunted village. And Moline Mueller might appear in there at a different stage in her life. So we'll just have to see.
Oh, cool.
That's exciting.
But yeah,
I
so
love
working on
these
that.
stories.
Well, keep us
Yay.
posted on that as you get closer, and we'll be sure and spread the word. And I'm sure I'd love to read it and come back and chat again.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great. And thank you, Kayla. And just thank you, both of you, for inviting me. I'm so excited that you chose Cold Comforts for your buddy read. And this has been a really fun discussion.
Where can people find you if they want to find more about your work or on social media?
My website is halbertfiction.com, and I'm on social media at halbertfiction.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I will say that I absolutely love this series. I absolutely thought it was brilliant. I loved it as a collection, and I loved all of the individual stories as well. And I can go out and actually say that I have not enjoyed a short story collection, not just horror, not literary fiction, just a short story collection since Stephen King's Full Dark No Stars.
Wow.
And
Well,
that was the book that got me into reading horror. So I have to say this was one of the best that I have read.
Well, I really appreciate that. That's quite a compliment. So thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I grew up reading Stephen King. So yeah.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today. I really appreciate that you're taking the time to talk about this incredible work.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thanks again. I hope to I'm really anxious to read your next novel, so I want to hear what happens in that story. Yeah. So thanks again. Thanks, Jane, for reading this with me, and again, thanks, Marianne, for coming by to chat with us.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for hosting.
Sure, it was a lot of fun.
Bye, guys.